timeline and sources of history. History is an unending dialogue between the present and the past, between the society of today and the society of yesterday. We can fully understand the present only in the light of the past. This is the statement given by E.H. Carr. He states that history is what we understand in between the present and the past. If we wanted to know what is actually happening in the present, we need to understand what happened in the past. Only by understanding or having the knowledge of past can we fully understand the present. So in this chapter, we'll be dealing with these three main questions. So the first question is, how do we measure historical time, and how can various sources help us understand history, and how did early humans live? So, how do we learn about the past? So in science, you might have studied that Earth has a very long history, of which we humans occupy a very tiny part, that is the most recent ones. So when we speak about history, it is a study of human past. So if we see this timeline, we can understand that this represents billion years ago, this the millions, and this is some years ago. So Earth is formed some 4.54 billion years ago, and we humans, that is Homo sapiens species, were formed some 3 lakh years ago. So in comparison to the formation of Earth and we humans, we can understand that we were only there some few years ago, whereas Earth is the one which is oldest, that has been from billion years ago. So there are many people who study the history of Earth. Some of them are trained to uncover the secrets left behind the Earth's surface and help us learn about its past. So there are many people who study the history of the Earth, but the way in which they study will be different. So the approach in the studying of the past will be different based on different people. So there are basically 4 groups. The first group is geologists. That is, they study the physical features of the earth, like the soil, stones, hills, mountains, rivers, seas, oceans, and other such physical features, physical parts of the earth. When we go to the paleontologists, they study the remains of plants and animals and humans from millions of years ago, that is in the form of fossils. So for example, if a particular plant dries up, then it will be under the soil and various layers of soil will be formed on it. So when we actually go deeper into the soil and find out the fossils of this plant, then we can actually understand the time zone in which the plant survived and what has happened in that particular period of time. So this is the work of paleontologists. They study the fossils, age-old fossils. So in the same way, our early humans might have also been under the soil and layers of soil might be formed. So when we go down deep, we'll understand the various things which our early humans have done, so when we go in deep, we'll understand how we have evolved to what we are at present. Next is anthropologists. Anthro, the word means humans. So they study the human societies and cultures from the oldest time to the present. So they speak with a lot of people and they understand our culture and how we have evolved to what we are now. Next is archaeologists. They study by going deep into the earth. That is, they'll find the tools, pots, beads, toys, bones and teeth of animals and humans and burnt grains and parts of houses or bricks. So with this, they try to study about the past. Next, we'll study about how the time is measured in history. So each society and culture has had its own ways of measuring time. So major events such as the birth of an important person or the start of a ruler's reign had often marked the beginning of the new era. So how do we actually measure history? So we usually measure history with the birth of an important person, for example, Jesus Christ, or by the start of a ruler's reign. So we can say the British era and many more things. So that is how we measure history. So at present, the Gregorian calendar is used worldwide, and side by side we have our own Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, Chinese and other calendars which are also used for calculating the dates of festivals and other auspicious events. So if we come to our Hindu calendar, it is usually calculated with the help of sun, moon, stars and many more things, and these help us in knowing the dates of important festivals like our own New Year like Pongal, Onam and many more. And whereas we use the Gregorian calendar for worldwide purposes so that it creates convenience to people and all the people can understand the Gregorian calendar. So in the West, the conventional year for Jesus Christ's birth has generally been taken to be the starting point for this calendar. So the birth of Jesus Christ is taken to be the starting point. And years are counted forward from this point and backward as well. So when we count forward, it is marked as AD, which is an abbreviation for the Latin phrase that refers to the years after Jesus' birth. However, now this AD is replaced to be as CE, that is the Common Era. So this AD is replaced to be CE. For example, 1947. So this year India has gained independence is written as 1947 AD. That is after the birth of Jesus Christ. After 1947 years, we have got our independence. Similarly, the years which are previously to the birth of Jesus is counted backwards and it is marked with the word BC, and later it is known to be BCE, that is before Common Era. For example, 560 BCE is an approximate year of the birth of Gautam Buddha. So even before the birth of Jesus Christ, the birth of Buddha has happened, that is some 560 years ago. So next, we'll understanding about why do we actually use the timeline. Why do we use a timeline? So a timeline is a convenient tool to mark such events as it shows as a sequence of dates and events which are covering any particular period. It runs from the beginning of humanity to the past with a few important landmarks. So for suppose this is a particular timeline where we can see the birth of Jesus Christ and after that and before that. So by simply looking, we can understand that Gautam Buddha is born before Jesus Christ. So a timeline also helps in understanding the order in which historical events have took place. For example, even without looking at the particular date, you can see the birth of Buddha occurs before that of Jesus Christ. So these are the uses of timeline. Now, century. So it is a period of 100 years. So a century is a period of 100 years. In history, specific centuries are counted every 100 years starting from the first CE. So for instance, we are currently in the 21st century which runs from 2001 to 2100. Next is a millennium. That is, it is a period of 100 years. Century is a period of 100 years while millennium is a period of 1000 years. In history, specific centuries are counted every 1000 years from the year first CE. So for instance, we are currently in the third millennium, so which began in 2000 and will go up to 3000 CE. It is important to note that in English, the plural of millennium is either millenniums or millennia. Both are correct. So, many Indian calendars rely on the positions of the sun and the moon to define the months of the years. So, a Panchanga is a book of tables which lists the days of each month along with the related astronomical data. So, for instance, it precisely predicts the events like solar and lunar eclipses as well, and the times for sunrise and sunset. Panchangas still widely used in India often give us the weather predictions for the year and the dates and the times of festival and many more. Next, what are the sources of history? So, when we wanted to collect history, there will be various sources from which we can actually know that. So, every object or a structure will tell us a story, and it is like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle. So, the objects that you see around your house will convey something of the history of your family. So, if you look at the jewelry in your house, you will understand the history of your family. Similarly, we can put together historical events through a variety of sources. So we can't just rely on one particular source. There will be many sources which we have to collect. So there will be oral sources, artistic sources, as archaeological sources, foreign sources, Indian literature, that is Vedas and Itihasas, and the poems and plays, historical writings, and the collection of stories. So all these sources together will combine to give us a particular information. So we'll combine all the sources together and actually identify what is actually happened in the past. So when historians study, say, a king or a queen of 1500 years ago, an ancient monument or a war or some items of trade, they take great care to gather information from as many sources as they can find and consult. Sometimes they confirm each other, but sometimes they may be contradictory. So, one information may not be valid when we collect the other information as well. So, in which case, we need to identify which source we can trust more. So, this is how they recreate the history of the period that we are studying at this moment. So, who contribute to all these sources of history? Obviously, the historians themselves, but even the archaeologists, epigraphists, that is, who study the ancient inscriptions, anthropologists, who study human societies and their cultures, and experts in literature and languages are some more. So, in addition, in the last 50 years and so, scientific studies have been contributing more and more in the reconstruction of the past. For example, studies of ancient climates, chemical studies of the excavated materials, and studies of genetics, that is, the branch of biology that studies how in plants and animals or humans certain features and characteristics are passed down from one generation to another. So when we study about the present, we also understand about the past. So even the early humans had legs, hands, but they used it in various other purposes, and we are evolved and we are using it for various other purposes. So with this, we can provide a fresh insight which supplement to the more usual sources. And when historians study the recent history, usually means the last 2 or 3 centuries. So another source is the newspapers. For the last few decades, electronic media, that is the internet and television, can also be consulted as a source of history. The beginning of human society. Modern humans, that is Homo sapiens, have walked the planet for about 3 lakh years. This appears to be a very long time, but yet it is a tiny fraction in comparison to Earth's history. 3 lakh years will become very tiny fraction in front of a lot of billion years ago, of which the Earth formation has took place. So early humans faced many challenges from nature and lived in bands or groups to help each other. They always lived in groups, and they were constantly seeking food and shelter and were mainly hunters and gatherers. This means that they relied on hunting and collecting edible plants and fruits for their survival. Our early ancestors also had certain beliefs about the natural elements and possibly also some notion of afterlife. That is, life begins after our. So these groups lived in the temporary camps, rock shelters, or caves and communicated with each other using languages that are now lost. So we don't have those languages at present. And they used fire and started making objects that made their life easier, like improved stone axes, blades, arrowheads, and other tools. Aspects of their life are visible in rock paintings. So they are a source of history for us and found in hundreds of caves all around the world. Some of those paintings depict the simple features of some few symbols, and others are more detailed, which represent the scenes with animals or humans. So, in time, these early humans learned to make simple tools such as stone and shell beads, the pendants of animal teeth, and sometimes exchange them with other groups. The first crops. Over long ages, the Earth's climate has gone through many changes. At certain times, it was very cold, and much of this was covered with ice. So, this is called the Ice Age, as you will learn in greater detail in science about this Ice Age. So, later, when the climate warmed up, this ice partly melted, and the resulting waters swelled the existing rivers and eventually drained into the oceans. So, first we had complete ice which is covered up, which is known as the Ice Age, and later this ice started to melt, and this later formed the oceans. So, the last ice age lasted over 1 lakh years ago to around 12,000 years ago. Afterwards, the living conditions of humans have improved. In many parts of the world, they started settling down. Rather than moving from one place to another, they started to settle down and cultivating cereals and grains. They also domesticated animals such as cattle and goats. With more food available, these communities grew in size and number and often settled down near the rivers, that is, the plains, which are more suitable for the survival. And this was not only because of the availability of water but also because of the soil could be more fertile there, and it made the process of growing crops much easier. So this is how they started to settle down at one particular place. So as communities grew, so did their social complexities. Leaders of chieftains were responsible for the well-being of the people, and everyone collectively worked towards the community's welfare. For example, there was no sense of individual ownership. The lands were collectively sold and harvested. So all the people in that group were responsible for that piece of land, and there was no individual ownership. And as time went by, hamlets grew into sizable villages. Hamlets are a small settlements. So the settlements grew into villages, and they exchanged goods, mostly food, clothing, and tools. And slowly, the networks of communication exchange were established among these villages, and some of them grew into small towns as well. So, first, hamlets grew into villages, and these villages grew into towns. So, new technologies appeared, for example, pottery for making the pots and other clay objects, and the use of metals which help them make durable tools and objects of daily use and ornaments. So we'll see that in chapter 6 about how this stage prepared for the emergency of what we call the civilization. So for now, it is important to remember that this early progress of humanity had to face many challenges. At some critical times, humanity could have almost been wiped up, as some early species had also undergone this. So we will never know those early humans to whose courage and persistence we owe our existence now, because our past has survived the harsh conditions that we are able to live on this planet at this particular moment. So in this chapter, we have dealt these important points, that is, we explored some ways to learn more about the past and the sources and different ways of measuring, that is years, decades, centuries and millenniums, source of history, and how they reconstruct with the various evidences that they found, and how human societies grew more complex with the progressing